When people picture a medieval castle, they picture cold stone halls, drafty corridors, walls thick enough to park a cart in, winters coming through the gaps. Nobody pictures heat. Nobody imagines the inside of a 12th century Crusader fortress in July. The Levantine sun hammering the outer walls absorbing it, the inner chambers building a slow thermal pressure that by mid-afternoon had nowhere to go. The image of medieval kingdoms as perpetually cold places is not what the historical record shows. It is what the postcard version sold you, but reality was much harder than history taught you. Medieval kingdoms in the eastern Mediterranean, and the garrison forces holding castles like Croc des Chevaliers in what is now Syria, were fighting something we consider completely solved today. Something so basic that losing it meant soldiers could not function, harvest could not be managed, and the entire logistical machinery of a fortress ground down in the heat. Not the enemy at the wall, not the siege engine, not the arrow, the temperature. And the kingdoms that survived were not the ones with the heaviest armor or the deepest treasury. They were the ones who solved passive cooling for $0, using physics that still works in every room you own right now. Your air conditioning bill is the only reason that sentence surprises you. Croc des Chevaliers, the hospitaller fortress, expanded continuously between 1142 and 1271 CE, sits in the Homs Gap at roughly 750 meters of elevation. Hugh Kennedy, in his 1994 study, Crusader Castles, published by Cambridge University Press, documents the castle's concentric wall system, outer walls averaging 3 to 4 meters of solid limestone, inner walls reaching up to 30 meters of combined masonry depth on the most exposed southern face. Kennedy notes that this was not purely defensive engineering. The thermal lag created by that depth of stone means the interior air temperature in the hottest summer months trails behind the exterior temperature by 6 to 8 hours. The walls absorb heat through the morning and early afternoon. The interior stays cool during the hottest part of the day. At night, the walls radiate stored heat outward, and the interior draws in cooler night air. The cycle resets every 24 hours without a single moving part. No compressor. No refrigerant. No electrical load. Just mass and time and the same sun rising on the same schedule it always has. That is not a historical footnote. That is operating physics. The global air conditioning market generated approximately $130 billion in revenue in 2022, according to the International Energy Agency's report, The Future of Cooling, first published in 2018 and updated through subsequent annual market analyses. Every dollar of that revenue is a subscription to the premise that cooling requires ongoing expenditure. It does not. The outer curtain wall at Croc des Chevaliers is still standing. The thermal lag it creates is still measurable. The physics has not shifted by one variable between 1200 CE and this afternoon. A wall that thick, facing the right direction, built from the right material, cannot be built. The invoice does not exist. The castle absorbed the sun before the sun could become a problem, and it released that stored heat into the night air when no one needed the rooms to be warm. That is the complete mechanism. Every month, your utility statement includes a charge for the exact same temperature differential, routed through machinery instead of through mass. The machinery can be invoiced, intact castle walls cannot. This is not a new idea. Theophilus Presbyter, the 12th century monk and craftsman who compiled De Diversis Artibus around 1125 CE, one of the most complete technical manuals surviving from medieval Europe, preserved in multiple manuscript copies, including one held in the British Library, describes the thermal behavior of stone and plaster in workshop contexts. He notes that thick walls oriented away from direct afternoon sun retain workable temperatures through summer afternoons, when direct exposure would otherwise compromise the fine temperature requirements of glazing and metalwork. Theophilus was writing about craft, not comfort, but the principle he identified is identical to what Kennedy documented at Crac. Mass absorbs heat, delays its transfer, and releases it when ambient temperature drops and the direction of heat flow reverses. Ibn al-Awwam, the Andalusian agronomist whose Kitab al-Filaha was compiled around 1180 CE in Seville, discusses in the first book the orientation of agricultural structures relative to prevailing wind and summer sun. His instructions for positioning storage structures and working spaces to exploit natural airflow patterns are the same orientation logic that hospitaller engineers applied to the placement of living quarters within Crac's inner ward. Ibn al-Awwam was writing for farmers managing grain and livestock. The physics he described was already running at fortress scale in Syria at the same moment he was setting it down in Andalusian Arabic. The medieval Islamic world added a second mechanism to this stone mass approach. Al-Jazari, the engineer whose Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices was completed in 1206 CE and survives in manuscript copies held at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and the Bodleian Library at Oxford, documented water-driven fan mechanisms and evaporative cooling systems used in the courts of the Artukid dynasty in what is now southeastern Turkey. Al-Jazari was not designing luxury. He was solving a functional engineering problem: how to keep indoor air bearable in a climate where outdoor air in summer regularly exceeds 40 degrees Celsius. His solutions combined moving air with evaporating water. The latent heat of evaporation pulls thermal energy out of the air as liquid water becomes vapor. The air temperature drops measurably for every gram of water evaporated per kilogram of moving air, and that relationship is governed by fixed thermodynamic constants that predate Al-Jazari and postdate him equally. The number has not changed since 1206. It is not a medieval estimate. It is a fixed property of water. And then, in 1902, Willis Carrier filed his first patent for a mechanical air conditioning system, designed not for human comfort, but for humidity control at the Sackett Wilhelm Lithographing Company in Brooklyn, New York. Carrier Engineering Corporation was incorporated in 1915. By the 1950s, residential air conditioning units had fallen in price to levels accessible to middle-class American households, and the knowledge that institutions like the Knights Hospitaller had maintained for over a century, passed from master builder to apprentice mason, encoded in construction decisions still visible at Crack today, recorded in manuscripts still held in the Bodleian Library at Oxford, became worth less than a machine you pay to run every month from June through September for the rest of your life. Not wrong, inconvenient. You cannot sell a subscription to a limestone wall facing the prevailing northwest wind. You can sell one to a compressor unit that needs refrigerant replacement every 5 years and full unit replacement every 12 to 15. That is the complete explanation. Nothing was banned, nothing was hidden. The billing cycle simply didn't have room for free. At its peak, medieval England alone contained over 1,500 functioning castles, documented by historian Robert Lydiard in Castles in Context, published in 2005 by Windgather Press. Every single one of them managed interior temperature without paying anyone, without a bill, without a supplier, without a service contract. The average American household today spends approximately $265 per year on air conditioning electricity alone, according to the United States Energy Information Administration's Residential Energy Consumption Survey, published in 2020. Medieval castle engineers paid zero. The physics they used has not changed by a single variable since 1200 CE. It is operating in your walls right now. And almost nobody is using it. You've seen this your whole life and just never connected the dots. A ceramic mug left on a sunny windowsill gets hot on the outside within 20 minutes. The coffee inside stays cool for an hour after you pour it. That is thermal mass working at mug scale. A wet towel hung over the open flap of a camping tent drops the temperature of the air moving through it by several degrees. You felt that. You probably called it luck or breeze and moved on. A basement without windows stays cool through August in climates that hit 35 degrees Celsius above ground. You've been in that basement. You noticed the temperature change at the bottom of the stairs without asking why. These are not coincidences of construction. They are the same physics that the master builders of Crac des Chevaliers engineered deliberately at full fortress scale, 900 years before the word air conditioning appeared in any language. The decision about whether to use those same principles in your own space is the only variable that has actually changed. Here's what you need. I want to be honest with you about every number. A standard 5-liter unglazed terracotta pot, the kind sold at any garden center or nursery, costs between $3 and $6 at retailers including Home Depot, Lowe's, or any independent garden supplier. Unglazed is the requirement. Glazed clay has sealed pores and will not work for this purpose. If you already own one, the cost is $0. A piece of natural fiber cloth, cotton, linen, burlap, or hessian, large enough to drape over and around the pot. An old cotton shirt, cut open, covers the surface area needed. Cost is $0 if you have one. A bowl or shallow saucer that fits under the pot to catch dripping water. Already in your kitchen. Water from your tap. A candle or a stick of incense for the airflow mapping step. If you own neither, a single candle costs under $1 at any grocery store. A standard indoor thermometer, if you want to measure the result rather than only feel it. Optional, $3 to $6 at any hardware store. For the wall positioning and window adjustment components of this build, you need nothing except the walls you already live inside and the windows you already own. That's genuinely it. Here's the one thing most people get wrong when they try to replicate what medieval castle engineers built. They copy the material. They read about thick stone walls and they assume stone is the answer. They look for mass without understanding what mass is doing, and they replicate the surface detail while missing the functional logic entirely. Every castle that failed as a thermal environment, and many did, used the same limestone, the same mortared rubble fill, the same construction methods as the castles that kept their interiors functional through every peak summer month. Chateau Gaillard, the fortress built by Richard the Warren of England between 1196 and 1198, and taken by Philip II of France after a siege beginning in August 1203, had walls comparable in construction method to Crac's. The stone was not the variable. The difference was one specific decision about orientation and airflow path. documented in Paul Deschamps' analysis Les Châteaux des Croisés en Terre Sainte. Volume 2, published in 1934 by the Bibliothèque archéologique et historique in Paris, which separated the hospitaller castles, still operating as thermally stable environments, from the ones that survive today only as exposed foundation courses in hillside scrub. Build the airflow path with the outlet on the same level as the inlet, and you get what the failed approaches got. Air that enters, heats, stagnates, and has no pressure gradient driving it out. The room builds heat through the afternoon and holds it through the night. Build the outlet above the inlet, on the wall opposite the prevailing breeze, and you get what Crac de Chevalier still demonstrates in every summer month. Hold a lit candle or burning incense stick at window height in the center of the room you want to cool. Watch where the smoke drifts. That direction is your active airflow path. The inlet, where cooler outdoor air will enter, belongs on the side the smoke comes from, positioned as low as possible, near floor level if the window configuration allows. The outlet belongs on the opposite side of the room, positioned as high as the available openings permit. Hot air is less dense than cool air. It rises. This is not a preference or a design choice. It is a consequence of the ideal gas law that governed air movement in 1200 CE exactly as it does now. A gap at floor level on the windward side and an open window or vent at ceiling height on the leeward side establishes a continuous convection path. Cool air enters low. It absorbs thermal energy from the room. It becomes less dense as it warms. It rises toward the outlet. New cool air is drawn in behind it. The room cycles without a motor because the temperature differential itself is the motor. This is the stack effect. Kennedy identifies it in Crusader castles as the consistent design logic across the hospitaller inner ward at Crac. The floor-level air intakes of the Great Hall were positioned on the northwest face, drawing from the prevailing westerly airflow through the Homs Gap. The high, narrow windows on the southeast face, deliberately set above standing head height, functioned as the thermal exhaust. The room has been breathing that same cycle for 900 years. Nothing maintains it, nothing powers it. Fill the unglazed terracotta pot with clean water. Set it on the saucer or bowl. Within 15 minutes, the outer surface of the pot will feel cool and faintly damp to the touch. The water is migrating outward through the unglazed clay's pore network by capillary action. As it reaches the exterior surface, it evaporates into the surrounding air. Each gram of water that converts from liquid to vapor carries approximately 2,260 joules of thermal energy with it as latent heat. That energy comes from the air immediately surrounding the pot's surface. The air temperature in the immediate vicinity of the pot drops. Place this pot in the airflow path you identified, between the floor-level inlet and the high-level outlet, so that moving air passes over the pot's surface before it reaches the area where you are sitting or sleeping. The air arriving at your position has already surrendered heat energy to the evaporation process at the pot's surface. You are not in a cooled room. You are in a cooled airstream that the pot is actively processing. Al-Jazari documented this mechanism in 1206 using fountain basins and shallow water channels, positioned in the airflow path between architectural openings in the Artuqat Palace complex. The engineering variable he was optimizing was surface area of evaporating water exposed to moving air. Your 5-liter terracotta pot provides roughly 2,100 to 1,500 square centimeters of evaporating surface, depending on its geometry. Al-Jazari's palace basins provided more. The mathematics scales proportionally. Wet the cloth thoroughly. Drape it over and around the pot's exterior surface so it draws additional moisture from the pot through direct contact. The cloth extends the effective evaporating surface area beyond the clay itself. Now hang a second piece of damp natural fiber cloth, a second shirt, a cut hessian bag, a folded cotton sheet, across the lower half of the inlet window opening, stretched between the frame edges so incoming air must pass through it before entering the room. Secure it with clothespins or tie it to the window latch. This is your secondary evaporative stage. In conditions of 30 degrees Celsius, moderate airflow, and relative humidity at or below 50%, a wet cloth positioned in the airflow path reduces the temperature of air passing through it by 4 to 7 degrees Celsius. That is not an approximation. It is the output of the psychrometric wet bulb equation for those specific conditions. The cloth at the window pre-cools the air before it reaches the pot. The pot cools it again. The air arriving at your position has passed through 2 evaporative stages. Position yourself along the airflow path, not near the window, not near a fan, along the direct line between the low inlet and the high outlet, in the zone where the processed air is moving before it has absorbed your body heat and begun to rise toward the exhaust. This is where hospital or garrison members ate and slept in the inner ward. Kennedy's site plan analysis in Crusader castles places the primary use areas of the Great Hall along the northwest corridor, the side facing the inlet in the active airflow zone, not in the thermal shadow of the south wall. You are making the same positioning decision at room scale. Night purging is the final step, and the one most people skip because it requires action at an inconvenient hour after sunset, specifically once outdoor air temperature falls below indoor air temperature, which in most temperate and warm climate locations occurs between 1 and 3 hours after sunset. Open every available inlet and outlet simultaneously. The low windows, the high windows, interior doors, attic vents if accessible. Let the night air move through the entire thermal volume of the space. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, everything that absorbed heat through the day will release it into the cooler, moving air. Run this flush for at least 2 hours. Then, before sunrise, close everything. Seal the inlet windows. Close the high vents. Draw any curtains or shutters over sun-facing glazing. The walls have now absorbed the cooler night air as their thermal charge. They will hold that cooler temperature as a buffer through the morning hours, maintaining interior temperatures below outdoor ambient until the thermal charge is exhausted, typically mid to late morning in a reasonably insulated modern room, and well into the afternoon in a properly massive stone structure. Kennedy identifies night purging as a consistent operational practice across every functioning hot climate hospital or castle he analyzed. At Crack, the architectural evidence for it is structural. The shuttering hardware for the floor-level northwest intakes is still partially intact, indicating they were designed to be closed, not left permanently open. The castle was breathing deliberately, not accidentally. A single household applying all 5 steps to its primary sleeping space in a climate running 30 degrees Celsius through summer nights can realistically maintain that room 3 to 5 degrees Celsius below outdoor ambient temperature during the sleeping hours that matter most. Against an average American air conditioning electricity expenditure of $265 per year, per the EIA's 2020 Residential Energy Consumption Survey, and against a standard window unit drawing between 500 and 1,140 watts per hour of operation depending on capacity, the overnight load is the largest portion of summer electricity consumption. The terracotta pot costs $6 once. The cloth costs nothing. The positioning costs nothing. The night purging costs nothing except the 10 minutes it takes to open and close windows twice. At the scale medieval castle communities actually operated, the hospital or garrison at Crack numbered several hundred soldiers at operational peak. Kennedy's estimate, based on the provisioning and water storage calculations visible in the castle's surviving administrative architecture. The passive cooling system served all of them through a single coherent architectural logic, calibrated to local wind patterns and solar trajectory. A modern residential street of 20 houses applying the same logic, inlet low on the prevailing wind face, outlet high on the leeward face, night purging coordinated across adjacent properties, would generate a neighborhood-scale temperature gradient that individual isolated units cannot achieve. The physics of stack ventilation does not stop at the property line. Coordinated night purging across multiple buildings creates a shared thermal pressure that draws cooler air through the entire block. Doris Behrens Abu Saif, in Islamic Architecture in Cairo, an introduction, published in 1989 by Brill, identifies the coordinated orientation of Malkoff wind catchers across adjacent buildings in the medieval Mamluk quarter of Cairo as a deliberate engineering decision. Adjacent Malkoffs were angled to the same prevailing northeast wind, creating complementary pressure zones that accelerated airflow through shared courtyards. The engineers who designed those buildings understood that the neighborhood was the unit of climate management, not the individual structure. No bills, no infrastructure, no asking anyone's permission, one honest limitation. Evaporative cooling is humidity dependent. The 4 to 7 degrees Celsius reduction that the cloth and the terracotta pot produce assumes ambient relative humidity consistently below 60%. In climates where summer humidity regularly exceeds 70%, the Gulf Coast of the United States, coastal Southeast Asia, lowland Central America, the evaporative component of this system delivers substantially less. The cloth stays wet but evaporates slowly. The cooling differential drops to 1 to 2 degrees Celsius at best, sometimes less. The stack effect still functions regardless of humidity because it is driven by temperature differential, not by evaporation. Night purging still works in humid climates on every night that outdoor temperature drops below indoor temperature, which in most humid, warm climates still occurs on the majority of summer nights, even if the drop is smaller than in dry climates. Medieval builders recognized this constraint in the same practical terms. Behrens Abu Saif notes that the Malkoff windcatcher design in medieval Cairo was optimized for the dry northeast winds of the winter and spring months, not for the coastal humidity of the Nile Delta during summer. In the humid zones of the medieval Islamic world, builders shifted emphasis toward dense shade architecture, reflective roof surfaces, and fountain-fed courtyard microcultures rather than evaporative airflow. The mechanism changes with the climate. The principle, find the free cooling source your local environment provides and route it deliberately through the space, does not change with the climate. It adapts to it. Crac des Chevaliers still stands. The walls are still there. The northwest face, the inner ward corridor, The floor-level air intakes that Kennedy documented in their original limestone jams, the high, narrow exhaust windows still open to the Homs Gap wind. The castle has been a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 2006. The thermal lag is still operating every summer afternoon on that Syrian hillside. The walls absorb heat from a sun that has not changed in intensity or trajectory since 1200. Every evening, that stored heat radiates outward while the interior draws in cooler air moving down through the Homs Gap. No one maintains it. No one services it. No one sends a bill for it. The stack effect doesn't expire. The latent heat of water evaporation doesn't expire. The thermal mass of anything denser than air doesn't expire. What you built today runs on the same equation that kept several hundred armed men functional through a Syrian summer 9 centuries before the first residential air conditioner was sold. I don't know what brought you here. It doesn't matter. It works either way.